Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another live stream. Thank you so much for joining me, and welcome to all of our regular live streamers, viewers, members, and subscribers. As usual, let's give ourselves a minute just to make sure everything's up and live and running before we begin this live stream. I posted a couple of videos earlier on for those of you who will be watching this live stream recorded that you can watch on my channel. For those of you who obviously prefer direct and short video updates, you can go ahead to my video section on my channel and watch all of these videos. And for those of you who prefer obviously the live stream, it's mainly for the extended version of the topic that we want to talk about, which is usually a little bit separate from our other videos. And again, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in. Welcome to our regular live streamers, members, subscribers, new subscribers, new viewers. Thank you so much for tuning in. Like I said, this live stream is an extended and longer video, really, to have more input, open the space up for the community to discuss, share their thoughts, opinions, and obviously ask any questions as and when required, really. Apologies in advance if I'm unable to reach some of your comments, but I usually pick the most relevant comments to speak about and discuss. So I posted a couple of videos earlier on. If you haven't watched them, you can watch them after this live stream. They're usually quite short lately, not to take too much of your time, in particular with the updates from the ground, mainly in Gaza, but also in the region, globally, when relevant. Hezbollah took down just another Hermes 900 now. This is the third one, fifth UAV in total, and they expelled an Israeli fighter jet. The fighter jets that commit massacres against innocent civilians. They're expelling them. Clearly, Israel is scared from Hezbollah. And they're talking and they're threatening, but they're scared. There's a new equation. And like we stated with the Nusayrat massacre, this barbaric massacre, the resistance is not affected. And that was evident today. Today, the Palestinian resistance conducted one of the biggest operations in Rafah, one of the biggest operations, dozens, not the biggest one, but one of the biggest, dozens of IDF casualties in Rafah alongside all of the other parts of Gaza. And Israel admitted that they have over a dozen casualties, 5 of which critically wounded. Usually Israel does not admit to the real numbers and real levels, and when they talk about over a dozen, then there's something, and there's something sometimes much bigger than what they declare. What I want to talk to you about tonight in this video is a report that we had from NBC about a potential talk between the United States directly and Hamas. The United States directly and Hamas. I'm going to read some parts of this article just to elaborate, and I'll share my thoughts about it and analyze it and say what means exactly the fact that the United States is even considering direct engagement with Hamas. Now, remember, the United States, when they started to engage in direct talks with certain groups, it was before a certain deal had been accomplished between the US and that group. For example, when the US withdrew from Afghanistan, they had several years of negotiations between them and the Taliban directly in Qatar. The Taliban had an office in Qatar after the US realized we're not going to win here, and after it became evident for them that it's no longer profitable and beneficial to remain in Afghanistan for this obviously unjust war that benefits none of the countries included in this war's populations, the countries that attacked Afghanistan or Iraq, but is only linked to the military-industrial complex and the people profiteering from these wars at the expense of their own populations, at the expense of their own armies, at the expense of their own troops. It's very important to note that. So now Hamas, the US is considering talking to them. Does that signal that the US is looking for a day after in a different manner than the one we saw so far? Is it just a pivot move? Is it just an act? Let's read through it. NBC News reported Biden administration has discussed potentially negotiating unilateral deal with Hamas to free US hostages. Unilateral deal to free US hostages. To release 5 of them being held in Gaza. If current ceasefire talks involving Israel fail, according to 2 current senior US officials and 2 former senior US officials, such negotiations would not include Israel and would be conducted through Qatari interlocutors, as current talks have been, said the officials, all of whom been briefed on the discussions. The Biden administration said it believes Hamas is holding 5 American hostages who were abducted during the 7th of October attacks on Israel. US officials are also hoping to recover the remains of 3 additional US citizens who are believed to have been killed on that day, which then took their bodies to Gaza by Hamas, obviously. The officials did not know what the United States might give Hamas in exchange for the release of the American hostages, but the officials said Hamas could have an incentive to cut a unilateral deal with Washington, because doing so would likely further strain relations between the US and Israel and put additional political pressure on Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. One of the former officials said that the internal discussions have also taken place in the context of whether the possibility of the US cutting a unilateral deal with Hamas might pressure Netanyahu to agree to a current version of the ceasefire proposals. The Israeli leader is already under intensifying pressure from the family members of hostages to reach an agreement that would free their loved ones. Earlier this week, Israeli officials estimated that some 120 hostages are still held by Hamas and that 43 of them have died in captivity. This number is inaccurate, by the way. The number is over 100. Over 50 were killed in the first month. Now we have, according to estimates and reports from the Palestinian resistance as well, over 110, not 43. The 5 Americans believed to be held in Gaza are Eden Alexander, Sagui Dekel Chen, Hirsch Goldberg Pauline, Omer Neutra, and Keith Siegel. The 3 Americans believed to have been killed during the 7th of October Hamas attack are Itai Chen, Judy Weinstein, and Gad Haggai. After the publication of this story, the parents of Goldberg Pauline issued a statement that they supported such talks. So the families of these people supported the talks between the United States and Hamas. Not just that, the prisoners' families, they already said accept any deal that Hamas proposes. We heard Abu Ubaidah, they told them, and the Palestinians and Hamas accepting a deal, accepted. And then obviously you had more protests in Israel, especially also after the previous couple of months when there was a report in Israel that the negotiating delegation has agreed on a deal, but Netanyahu rejected it. Not only one time, but multiple times. Clearly, Benjamin Netanyahu wants to make it impossible to reach a deal. He ordered the negotiating delegation not to sign a deal. And he sent his representative to monitor if they follow his demands to the T. Quote, "We have seen the reports that the US administration is considering negotiating directly with Hamas on freeing US citizens from captivity in Gaza," Rachel Goldberg Pauline and John Pauline said, "We welcome any negotiations that will lead to the return home of our loved ones who have been in captivity for over 8 months. We pray that every family with hostages will be reunited with their loved ones imminently." Over the weekend, the Israeli hostages kidnapped from the Nova Music Festival were rescued in an operation conducted by the Israeli Defense Forces. Gaza's health ministry said that at least 274 Palestinians, including dozens of children, were killed during the Israeli raid. On Monday, Secretary of State Antony Blinken is expected to travel to the region to discuss the latest attempts to secure a ceasefire deal. A senior administration official told NBC News that the Israeli raid to free the 4 hostages on Saturday will likely make Blinken's efforts to achieve an agreement and release the remaining hostages even more difficult. Rescuing the Israeli hostages has only strengthened Netanyahu's determination to continue pursuing military operations in Gaza rather than committing to a halt in the fighting, the senior administration official said. In some past efforts to free wrongfully detained Americans overseas, the U.S. has conducted prisoner swaps. It's unclear if there are prisoners in U.S. custody whose release Hamas would want to secure and whom the Biden administration would deem acceptable to free based on their criminal convictions. The current senior U.S. official, though, said the idea of trying to negotiate a deal between the Biden administration and Hamas remained a very real option if the current proposed ceasefire deal fails to advance. White House National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan said Sunday that the U.S. is still waiting on an official response from Hamas to the latest offer. Last week, CIA Director William Burns and White House Middle East Coordinator Brett McGurk both traveled to the region to continue talks on the proposal. What do we understand from all of this? Number one, the mere fact solely that the United States is willing or considering to engage in direct talks with Hamas signals the power of Hamas. Hamas proved that we're here to stay. We're going nowhere. You're talking about the same administration that is actively pushing for a genocide against them, the same administration that enabled Israel, the same administration that supported Israel relentlessly, unconditionally, vetoes everything. And it's an administration that, if they weren't included in this, if they did not support this genocide and this unconditional support for Israel, military, political, diplomatic support, we wouldn't have had this. Israel is unable to conduct anything without the US. So Hamas is strong. That's number one. Secondly, Hamas is legit. You can call them whatever you want to call them, label them, prescribe them, whatever you want to do. They're a legit movement. They're strong. They represent the Palestinian people who elected them in a democratic election that the previous US President Jimmy Carter himself monitored in Gaza. So the US taking steps closer. Also, the level of tensions, regardless of the support, regardless of the strategic ties, regardless of the US or supposed US interests, it's not a national US interest, by the way. It's a made-up interest for elites, people who are interested in these imperial neo-colonies and genocides across the world to support their own greed, their own interests. Israel being there is not a national interest for the United States population. Does anyone disagree with me? What does Israel help the American people with? Someone explain to me. Is any average American person benefiting from Israel? Is any European resident benefiting from the existence of Israel? Yet they want to make it out as if this country is necessary. They're claiming that they're representing, the Western values, and democracy in the Middle East? If they are, then thank you so much. We're not interested in your values and your version of democracy. You can take it back. The people of Western populations have no benefit from Israel. It's only the elites who thrive on wars and genocides, and people in power who make money and profiteer out of it. There's a clear strain. There's a clear problem between the United States administration and the Netanyahu administration. The latest resignations from Benny Gantz and his party members who were participating in the war cabinet, and the resignation of the Gaza division commander that followed the resignations of the whole team of the IDF spokesperson, a leading figure in the Israeli military intelligence directorate, and a commander from the West Bank in the IDF, all signal that Netanyahu himself, that's it, is being on his own. And now, obviously, he doesn't know exactly what to do. He is having multiple meetings with many people in Israel that could further legitimize his government and the war cabinet. Itamar Ben-Gvir is all of a sudden, he sent him a letter, by the way, demanding to take the position of Benny Gantz. And his position, a made-up position, a new position that didn't exist before in Israel, the Minister for National Security. When he signed the letter, he put the title, the Defense Minister. Is that a mistake, or is he hinting at something? He labeled himself the Defense Minister. Imagine the chaos and the level of unprofessionalism. A minister in the Israeli government makes up his own title, the Minister of Defense. But you still have a Minister of Defense. His name is Yoav Gallant. He hasn't resigned. Plus, how can you make up your own title? Your title is the Minister of National Security. You're not the Minister of Defense. And many people in Israel are obviously criticizing that. Netanyahu ideally does not want him in, because if he has him in, he will have more headache. Therefore, he's expanding his options. Some of the people who he's speaking with are Avigdor Lieberman and Gideon Sa'ar. However, it's unlikely that he's going to do anything with them. Why? Because Lieberman, who reportedly was offered the position of a defense minister instead of Yoav Gallant, immediately went to Benny Gantz after his resignation. He offered him to collaborate and to take down Benjamin Netanyahu. And there are talks about attempts in Israel to disperse the Israeli Knesset. And if such moves would take place in Israel, you're talking about really, really bad situation, worse than what we already have at the moment. This was the main topic that I wanted to talk to you about. Let me open up the space up for you, for your comments, questions. And again, welcome everyone. Welcome to everyone who is regular. Welcome to all of our new viewers, our regular viewers, subscribers, and members. And if you wouldn't mind, obviously highlighting, either tag me or highlight your comment in some manner. Bob Marston, thank you so much for your super thanks. Kate is saying the US wants Saudi to sign a normalization with Israel in exchange to nuclear weapons toys. USA defends Saudi. Question is, why Saudi wants toys from the USA when both countries are buying Iran drones and toys? Sorry, when other countries are buying Iran drones and toys. Well, firstly, the United States is attempting this because they're seeing a shift, regardless of any country's position, by the way, when it comes to the genocide. the influence of the United States administration in the Middle East is fading away. That has been evident in recent years from how the leaders of these countries, including Egypt and Saudi Arabia, accepted Joe Biden. They didn't even see him in the airport. It's as if they're waiting for, some representative, not the US president. And these things, I know they're diplomatic and they're visual appearances, but they mean things on a political level. Obviously, from Egypt's side, they have been diversifying their military purchases with Saudi Arabia. You have China, obviously they brokered a deal with them, and Iran that ended the conflict in Yemen, something that all Western countries failed to do. As a matter of fact, they participated in expanding the war further, despite calls from their populations to stop assisting the massacres in Yemen and indiscriminately supporting, unconditionally supporting Saudi Arabia. And the US is worried from the growing Chinese influence. Why? Because China has the capacity to take the US role in the Middle East. It's not like they don't. And they're very worried about certain Saudi steps, including the removal of the dollar when it comes to the trade with the oil. Now, we've had a recent report that the Saudi government is considering trading oil with China in the Chinese currency. That's also a problem for the US. BRICS countries are declaring time after time that we are going to start dealing in our own currencies. China and Russia, they had a recent deal where they said all of our engagement, all of our financial engagement, our trade will be done in our own currencies, the ruble and the yuan. And obviously the United States is not happy. They want to dictate other countries and what they do and what type of currencies that they use. So this defense of Saudi Arabia, really, it can come from somewhere else. And with regards to other countries buying Iranian drones and other weapons, obviously the United States could use that as leverage with Saudi Arabia, saying that, we have something to counter that. But now with obviously the war in Ukraine and the fact that Russia is using so many Iranian weapons that prove to be effective, what's happening in Gaza now with certain Iranian weapons being used are showing that if Hezbollah's able to take down the Iron Dome, just take that as an example. Saudi Arabia is looking, other countries are looking. Israel wants to export the Iron Dome. Now they're seeing the vulnerability. And Israel has no answer. Because with every war, it's a showcase, right? An example of how each country performs, how effective their weapons are, what are the weak points, what are the strong points. And now Israel is not in a good position. And obviously Israel is tied with the military-industrial complex of the United States. When it comes to the Iron Dome, even the Israeli manufacturing companies, many of them have joint operations with the United States. And with the Iron Dome itself, for example, Israel relies on the US to fill it up with missiles. That's why, like I said, if the United States lifts the support, there's no support for Israel, no Iron Dome, no nothing. And that's why in Israel there's been increasing talks about increasing the domestic production and not relying on any country, not relying on the goyim, as they call them, even the United States. And they need to manufacture everything across the board. That was a statement made by the defense minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, other leading figures in the country, and many in the Israeli military-industrial complex. So I hope that elaborates. And Manuel, thank you so much for your super thanks. Let's see where we reached. White was saying one of the Arab yelled at the Palestinian Authority, "You are equivalent to the 12 thieves of Arabia." Well, it was the UAE representative when he met him with other Arab leaders, and he told the representative of the Palestinian Authority, Sheikh, I think Hussein Sheikh, his name is, he told him, "Your authority is Ali Baba wal Arba'in Harami, Ali Baba and the 40 thieves." And he stormed out. Because clearly they're obviously you doing the casual thing, beggars, begging for money, give us money, give us money. Why? So you can fill your pockets up. What are you doing exactly? They haven't been doing anything for the Palestinian people for the past 30 years, only enabling this expansionist neo-colonialist state. ABC said the Saudi have stated they will not recognize a U.S. Zionazis until there is a Palestinian state. They did this perhaps knowing that the U.S. Zionazis will try their utmost to not allow this to happen. Look, we also had reports from Saudi Arabia that they're willing to have some sort of an understanding without like the complete definition of a Palestinian state. Look, let's not forget the Saudi government, they had the Saudi peace proposal back in 2000, where they offered Israel full recognition from most Arab and Muslim nations in return to having a Palestinian state. What did the US do? What did Israel do at the time? Prime Minister Ariel Sharon, he held this proposal and he ripped it apart. This is how Israel views it. Clearly, there were certain things that gave the Palestinians obviously a level of independence, of sovereignty. And Israel doesn't want, when Israel even talks about a Palestinian, now obviously they're not talking about a Palestinian state. Let's understand that very well, by the way. Benjamin Netanyahu, the opposition in Israel, they don't want a Palestinian state. They're clear about it. Not led by the Palestinian Authority, not led by Hamas, not led by anyone. They want a small little puppet that is subject to their complete demands, in line with Benjamin Netanyahu's declaration that we will have complete security control between the Jordan River to the sea. What does that mean? Having a couple of counselors, local authorities, right? Like the Palestinian president now. Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas is like having a head of a local authority with stripped powers. That's what it is. Even some local authority heads have more power than him. The guy doesn't move unless he receives an authorization by the Israeli Shin Bet. And he was open about it. Previously, the Arab states invited him for a meeting after an escalation in Gaza. Can't come. Why? Qatar representatives at the time said, no, the Palestinian president said, if I come, they'll shoot me. Well, is that a president? What kind of president is that? So, obviously, now, Saudi Arabia probably remembers those days, And clearly it's not like you have a side in Israel that's willing to give you a state. That's the thing. If you want to talk about a state, show me a side interesting in delivering, because you can't impose a state. You can't impose a state without having a complete understanding, right? Unless you're talking about like a ongoing conflict until the Palestinians impose their will, because they're constantly met with rejection and supremacy and people who deny their existence. You need to understand that the people in the Israeli government now, they deny the existence of a Palestinian people. How can they give them a Palestinian state? Benjamin Netanyahu, the Palestinians don't exist. Bezalel Smotrich, there is no such thing as Palestinians. Ben Gvir, these people don't believe that there is a Palestinian people. They believe that, we're Arabs, we traveled there. But Milikovsky and Shertok and Grun, they're the original landowners, right? Franz Fitzgerald saying, Mahmoud, if the US does work with Hamas on a prisoner release, do you think this will open the door for more talks or this would be a one-time thing. I think it could open the door. And I've always been personally an advocate of people talking, as hard as it is, even if Israel and Hamas, like ideally in a realistic situation, right? Hamas clearly represent a large chunk of Palestinian people, and they're here to stay. Why not sit down with them and talk to them instead of having this arrogant approach and labeling them and acting as if they are the bad guys that cannot be spoken with? Who do you speak with to try and make peace? You speak with your enemies. You don't speak with your friends to make peace. You don't need peace with your friends. You speak with your enemies. So even if Israel and Hamas directly spoke, why not? Not a problem. What's the problem with that? But again, certain situations, certain tensions, certain level of hostility, all of these things, they pose restrictions, obviously. But why not? Let the United States talk with them, even if it's just an attempt. And let me tell you something. If the US talks with Hamas, they will realize they will be speaking with far more reasonable people than Israel. You're talking about the country that you supposedly support because you claim that they are there as a national interest, and they're blanking you, they're disrespecting you, they're calling you a goy. If you don't want to help us, we'll stand on our own. But Itamar Ben-Gvir already called Biden a Hamas lover, a Biden heart Hamas. It's like, if they speak with Hamas, they'll realize they speak with people with more common sense. They're incomparable with arrogance in Israel. And Hamas showed leniency in the negotiations, aside from the fact that they have strict guidelines, ending the genocide, expelling the child murderers out of Gaza, allowing all aid in, allowing the people to go back to each place in Gaza, including the north, freely, rebuilding, obviously temporary housing, and finally a good prisoner exchange deal. So it could open the door, and that would be, in my opinion, a good thing. I think the United States administration need to start really understanding and realizing where things are going. Israel is not there to stay. Israel has only been buying time from a long time, by the way. It's not just new. Israel is just buying time. Now it's in the last few minutes. Obviously, translated in real time. It could be months, years, couple of decades, whatever it is, but it's still buying time. And by the way, in the course of history, that's a small amount of time, by the way. But again, obviously, Hamas would have to be vigilant because the United States administration is not an administration to be trusted. So what, Rose, why does the Zionists try to justify the massacres and barbarism by blaming Hamas for using civilians as human shields? Because everything is prepared in advance. And they are artists in deflection, in manipulation, in denying. Deny, deflect, shift the blame. This is what they do. Look at the 7th of October. All of the lies, 40 beheaded babies, we saw the beheaded babies, the real beheaded. They were preparing to behead the Palestinian babies. That's why they said it before Hamas. Do you understand? They massacred their people in the Nova Festival, Ra'im, Nir Oz, and Be'eri. They massacred their people being kidnapped to Gaza. Evident. How many witness statements do I have to bring you? And they had it planned. They had it planned. So they knew it was coming. They probably didn't anticipate the scale. They prepared how they're going to respond to justify the coming massacre. And they had their support, obviously, from certain governments, certain Western governments, and they went ahead with it. However, again, how effective is this now? It hardly plays on anyone, really. Well, blaming Hamas that they hide between civilians, when we've seen and we're constantly seeing evidence of Israeli soldiers using Palestinians as human shields. So they're proper deflection, which is very traditional. Lie, deflect, deny. Lie, deflect, deny. This is what they do. Creative username: if the US and Israel or both use the Pierre in their operation, do you think Hamas will target the Pierre? Look, there were reports that Hamas already targeted the Pierre. By the way, the Pierre, it's not like it's a reliable Pierre. We saw it floating in the sea. But they will definitely keep an eye on it, to say the least, now that it's been exposed. Clearly, and we've said it from day one, why do you need a Pierre when you have land routes and thousands of trucks waiting? Very ambiguous. And now clearly a helicopter flying from there, the 8 truck, reportedly as well. So clearly they will have, they will certainly take measures, because from their perspective, they made a tactical mistake. Clearly there was an error there. Israel obviously committed a barbaric massacre, and that will translate to certain prisoners having harsher conditions, and obviously keeping more of an eye on this ambiguous Pierre. Ruby K, the multipolar world will succeed. No more monopolies driven by Western imperialist terrorism, military industrial complex. Everyone fed up of these bullies. Peace has to be defended as better for and money. Well, look, we're getting there. We are getting there. You know, it would be good and less devastating if the countries in question, but primarily the United States of America, because even if you talk about the NATO, you're talking about the United States. The United States dictates this, apart from a couple of countries who, obviously Europe is split when it comes to Ukraine. Some of them are realizing the facade and the lies. Certain countries are taking different measures with Israel, recognizing Palestine, etc. We're heading there. It would be good if the United States administration realizes that, you know, this time is over. This unipolar world is over. And instead of provoking and taking more reckless measures that will only lead to more bloodshed for Americans and other global populations, simply understand that the ideology of Zionism and this arrogant approach towards the world simply does not work and is not sustainable. And will not work by force, by the way. If you're not going to understand it, well, by force. Why? Because you have rising powers anyway. It's not like they don't really see that. They do see that, right? But they're acting. I mean, if you listen to Donald Trump sometimes and the US administration, they sometimes still behave like they're in the 50s. It's not the 50s anymore. And there are people in the administration who probably realize that. Now, some of them obviously resign, but they're still pushing. They're still pushing instead of looking for a peaceful and more harmonious world where resources are divided equally, powers are divided equally. It's a whole world you're talking about. You're not talking about one nation, right? It's a small village, a global village, really, where people are reliant on each other, countries are reliant on each other. Supposedly, the biggest country that the US has hostilities with is China, which is the biggest country that it has trade with. You rely on them. You rely on China. So why are you being arrogant? And then again, poking them everywhere. Hostile approach 24/7. They're still used to, and they're testing the waters. How far can we go? And obviously, for example, Russia and China will show them, every once in a while. They travel in their area, they'll send the fighter jet to warn them, get the hell out of here. So raising concerns in the South China Sea. What the hell are you doing there? Imagine Chinese aircraft carriers sitting next to the coast of California or Florida or something. And then saying, oh, the US, don't interfere. Hey, this is freedom of movement. It's as if how Israel is treating its neighboring countries, by the way. They'll conduct flights over Lebanon, over Syria, bomb them to defend our security, We need to have freedom of movement in these areas to defend our security. Wow. And again, this approach it's not sustainable. But the people of the region and the people globally of the global South or the East are understanding that. That's why they started to have more unities, have more diversification, less reliance on the US, shifting, dealing between them, strengthening themselves more, because they realize that's the way, because we're governed we're ruled in a world, right? That is like the jungle law, really. Even the jungle law could be more merciful. Power, the language of power. Kate's saying this negotiation will only for Gazans, 10K West Bank Palestinians in prison, land stolen. Trump will give the West Bank to Israel and will tear up the negotiations like he did before Iran. Why should anyone trust the USA? Well, no one should trust the USA. It's not about trust. The 10K prisoners are both West Bank and Gaza, and other prisoners as well in 1948 territories. And that's assuming that Trump is going to be the next president. That's obviously not guaranteed. But again, you don't necessarily negotiate with someone who you trust. You negotiate with someone sometimes you don't. If your enemy, do you trust your enemy? You don't trust them. But you negotiate with them, see where things might go. Try and see if you can have a mutual language with them, build some rapport, build levels of understanding, and then try and see if you can actually reach a solution. And again, that wouldn't have happened if the Palestinian people had no one to defend them, if the Palestinian people did not have the armed forces of Palestine, led by Hamas. It wouldn't have happened. The begging authority in the West Bank, what did they achieve? They achieved nothing. So clearly they took their steps. Now the US is slowly recognizing. Hell, Israel realizes, but they're not admitting, right? Because they're way too arrogant and stubborn to understand there's a shift. But the Israeli population is understanding. That's why they're fleeing the country, right? That's why most of them hold other passports. Why? It's a psychological thing. I know I'm on land that was stolen, and this is not really a safe place. And they're slowly waking up from this drunken dream, really, of Zionism and this whole facade that Israel has been selling them. Bondui, have you heard of the Yemeni foiling of CIA Israeli spy network in their country? Yes, I've heard about that. Clearly a big network. Again, not surprising. And clearly they've taken the necessary measures. Sprinks is telling me, don't answer the phone, Mahmoud, it's Satan again, and he's still upset with you. Yeah, Satan is very upset with me for linking him with Israel. He's not talking to me anymore, Satan. And R. Christie, thank you so much for your super thanks. Our Chris is saying, good morning, Mahmoud and dear community. Wow, morning to you. It's night here. Where are you from? Good morning. Did you see the French MPs from Palestinian flag with their clothes? It was beautiful. Yeah, I saw that. It was great. Yeah, look, you're seeing more people and in Italy and in other countries as well. And that's great. It's really good. I saw that earlier on today. Gulliberg is saying deep strikes IDF attack in Hermel deep in Lebanon near Syria border. Multiple targets reportedly hit. I'm not surprised. But again, they're ineffective. Clearly, Israel has no answer when it comes to Hezbollah. They don't have an answer. They can act like, oh, we're getting deeper in and this and that. And what are you doing? Nothing. Simply nothing with Hezbollah. They took down another, their biggest UAV now, expelling their fighter jets from Lebanon. This is a very important move that could save lives, by the way. Because this is how Israel commits the massacres. If Gaza had anti-aircraft, we wouldn't have seen this. Marvin Verg is saying, I think Trump will be president, but he's also a Zio tool, gave Zion's Golan Heights capital, Jerusalem. Look, Trump and no other leader in the world that supports this Zionist state is entitled or in any position to give anyone anything. It's not yours. You're not entitled to give it to anyone. Like the British Empire previously with the Balfour Declaration. Who are you even? You're not the owner of that land. You're not entitled to say anything. That's not the part of the world that you're coming thousands of miles away. What do you have to do here? Get the hell out of here. This land belongs to its own people. Get the hell out. You have no say in here. So neither does Trump nor any other government. They don't have a say in what happens in, but it's the Palestinian people's choice. The owners of the land, they live there. They have the right to write their own destiny, and they will. So even if he comes and if he tries to, he tried to push for what was labeled as the deal of the century. Because don't forget, Trump is narcissistic. He wants to be seen as a person who achieves everything. Every time they ask him about Russia and Ukraine, if I was there, it wouldn't have happened. Da, da, da. Or now Hamas, if I was there, it wouldn't have happened. If Trump, he thinks every time he's there, nothing happens. Yeah, narcissistic individual. So even if he comes in and he says, okay, Golan Heights, and would you think the Palestinian people are going to listen to him? Israel will be happy with itself slightly, saying, oh, look, the US president gave us or legitimized this. If you're an authentic country, why do you keep begging for legitimacy? If you're a real, genuine country, why are you begging for legitimacy and people to recognize your eternal capital? And begging countries to have peace treaties, including Netanyahu himself. He was begging the UAE, by the way. This facade of the Abraham Accords, it was mostly driven by Israel. Constant talks, please, this, that. And they want certain heads of state to visit them. And by the way, like one interesting story, for example, they begged the late Queen Elizabeth from the UK to visit Israel. They begged her for 5 decades. She never came. Why do you beg her to come? Why do you want someone to come so badly to your country? And after they said no multiple times, why is that? They want to receive legitimacy. They want that person to set foot in that land and say, oh yeah, that's fine. You have a right to be there. Same with Trump and other leaders in Arab states too. And they consider, why do they hate us? Why do they? It's because you established yourself on an ethnic cleansing campaign, on a genocide. That's why. What's so difficult about that? For you to understand. And Matlas X, thank you so much, saying, so where is the USS Eisenhower? Probably undergoing some repairs. 3 times it was attacked, so. Zach is asking me, Mahmoud, I asked you the other day, I'm sorry if I missed it, my friend. I always apologize in advance if I don't take some questions. It's good that you highlighted. You asked about Ben-Gvir trying to be in the war cabinet. Do you think he will threaten to topple the government if he does not get his way? Look, not necessarily, because not allowing him in the war cabinet, he needs to have a bit more leverage when it comes to that. He already accepted the fact that he was excluded from the war cabinet because he asked to be there from the beginning, and Netanyahu didn't agree to that. I don't think it's a deal breaker for him, because don't forget, he's also enjoying his position. I mean, these people bark so much, but they're enjoying the luxury of being a minister. And they know if they collapse the government, they're going as well. Right? So lots of it is trying to suck more out of Benjamin Netanyahu, who is heavily reliant on them. Why, by the way? Why is he heavily reliant on them? Because he has no other option. If he had another option, he would have had a government with them. Do you know that? Benjamin Netanyahu does not want them. He avoided them. Most of the previous all of the previous callers, he avoided them, most of them, because he doesn't like them. He doesn't want to be with them. He knows who they are, but he's so narcissistic and obsessed with himself and selfish and is careless about anything apart from himself that he will form a coalition with them. So it's not as if if he has a choice, he'll ditch them. He would even go with some of the Palestinian Arab joint parties in Israel, by the way. He previously paved the way for the Islamic movement in Israel to join the following coalition after it failed with him. That was very short-lived, between Bennett and Lapid. He would strike a deal with anyone. And obviously, after everything failed, he had to have a deal with them. It's not as if he likes them. He does not like them. But then again, they also understand that they are enjoying this power. And if they do collapse the government, then they're collapsing too. And it's very, very unlikely that anyone else will include them in a coalition, by the way. It's extremely unlikely that anyone would accept Ben-Gvir and Smotrich in a coalition. Probably Smotrich, if he changes a couple of things, but then again, he's toxic like Ben-Gvir. Ruby K is saying, I believe USA is in debt to China. They are. Well, there are 300. How many trillions? I forgot even how many trillions. How many trillions are there? 300 trillion, 3 trillion, 30 trillion? Where is China? More than 1 trillion. More than 1 trillion, but they threatened them not to pay back. Mafia. So China has a level of control, but it's a joint thing. Because as an exporter, you also rely on the consumer. They know each other's powers. And South America is rising, and Africa and BRICS nations, yes. Swatros, is it true that the IF used fake A-truck using the US-built Pierre in the Nusayrat operation? The US Army had some involvement? Yes. The United States, the UK, and Israel participated in that operation. The forces on the ground, those who conducted the operation, were Israeli forces. A joint effort between the IDF, the Israeli Shin Bet, and a unit called the Yamam, which is a top elite unit in Israel. The US helped with logistics, and the UK helped with surveillance. The US sent over 200 spy missions to Gaza from Cyprus, including in the time where the British aid workers were killed. 3, deliberately killed, although Israel knew who they were and what they were doing, because they were in contact with the IDF, by the way. Some people don't know that. This aid group, the 3 British people who were assassinated, who also served in the British Army, by the way, they were in contact, telling them, we're here, we're providing aid, and Israel killed them. And there was no condemnation from the British government. Ruby K, Iran has deterrent supremacy. They can hit USA, UK military targets based successfully. Iran will crush the entity if they proceed with a full-on conflict with them, and the West can't do anything. That's true to a very large extent. They do have a lot of things on all US and foreign bases in the Middle East, and they know how vulnerable they are. It didn't even have to take Iran to intervene directly to hit the Saudi oil fields. It was the Ansarullah hitting them. Do you remember when they were beefing with Saudi Arabia? The US didn't stop them from doing that. What, the Patriot? So they know that. And again, I mean, they can do stuff with, it's not like they can't do stuff with, they can, but obviously they know how vulnerable they are. And clearly this attack on Israel from Iran proved that Iran can go through 5 of the most advanced air defense systems in the world and reach, by sending initially the cheapy UAVs, exhausting the defenses, and then landing whatever they want to land. So they don't have an answer for everything. And look at what Hezbollah is doing. I mean, it's not just Iran. Like Hezbollah themselves are causing havoc to Israel. And if they're doing that, well, what can Iran do? Tishikoma, is there any more updates about the psycho squatter flattening their own cars with tanks? Your Tishikoma is referencing to the video that I published about a report in Israel that an IDF tank went over IDF reservists' cars knowingly next to the Gaza borders. They parked their cars to participate in Gaza, then an IDF tank came and ran over them. And at the time that raised questions, why are they doing that? Are they upset with the army itself? Are they doing it for moral purpose? What are they doing it for? But that was just one example out of very, very many examples. Firstly, the historical respect of the military establishment in Israel has been shattered to pieces. It already started to lose respect with the judicial reform, where many people who participated in the army formed groups to protest in Israel against the judicial reform and said we will not serve under a dictatorship. Benjamin Netanyahu received a letter from 1,000 Israeli pilots in August 2023 saying that we will not serve if the judicial reform is passed. We won't serve a dictatorship. Then you've had other tensions and people were already fleeing the country from the judicial reform days, and even before that, but that ignited it. Then 7th of October came, mass exodus, really, masses of people leaving and people losing faith in their own country to protect them. 8 months in, their country and their army, they still don't have an answer. They're unable to eliminate the Hamas, like they're saying. Hamas is getting stronger. They are getting the worst humiliation in their history by a small paramilitary group in Gaza, and then by a bigger paramilitary group in Lebanon. They're refusing to serve in the army. They were running away from the battlefield. Don't you remember in the early days, 2,000 left with 2 commanders. Then more and more people refusing to serve. Today, we obviously parents sending letters to the government. We won't redeploy our children. Many more people calling for exemption. They don't have any. It led to a situation. Listen to this example, by the way. I wanted to have another video about this, by the way, but I'll share it with you. There was an Israeli who was boasting about his crimes in Gaza, a soldier, I forgot his name now, boasting about his crimes, and then he left, apparently PTSD. So they get into mental problems when they boast about crimes, apparently. So he was injured, basically, right? Mental illness and what have you. Despite that, and this shows how desperate the army is, they asked him to be redeployed to Rafah, although he had a severe mental problem, PTSD. 2 days before his deployment, he committed suicide. And guess what? The army didn't even give him a state military funeral. And again, his family was fuming. Like the family of the guy who was killed in the operation to rescue these hostages during the massacre in Al-Nusayrat. They said, we don't want to see anyone from the government. So there's massive internal division. The attacks on Israeli bases, the IDF reservist who went and threw a grenade on Tal HaShomer, until the biggest Israeli base that caught fire just over 3 weeks ago. And Tel Aviv is known for a decent amount of anti-Zionists there, by the way, and people who oppose the government. All of that signals that that's it. They're collapsing from within. It's not just the level, and it has a lot to do with it, the level of resistance, the level of perseverance, the fact that they're unable to find military answers. Israel was used to find military answers, to finding. And now they're eating themselves from within. Social split, political split, military split, war cabinet split. You're in the worst war in your history and people are resigning. Shows you how bad the situation is. If they can't see past what's happening, if Benjamin Netanyahu is unwilling to compromise in Israel's worst period in history, in accordance to many people in Israel, to many people Israel already ended, by the way. You need to understand that. So I wouldn't be surprised if we have more scenes like that. Ben Gvir and Smotrich, Kate saying these two cannot live among humans. There are many like them. It's not just them. Kate, why do you think the USA pushed the ceasefire proposal? USA, Israel declared defeat in small print. Look, Biden has had enough. Biden already doesn't like Netanyahu. Although he declares he's a Zionist, right? He does not like Benjamin Netanyahu. I had a problem with him when he was the vice president in the Obama era. Conversations were leaked, about Biden saying swear words about Benjamin Netanyahu. You probably saw them. And he's sick of him. He's had so many proposals. He wanted him to have the ceasefire because it's not good for him. Although they see Israel, or they claim that Israel is an interest, right? A national interest for the US. Although it's not, by the way. Having peace is good for the American people and the global population, isn't it? War is good for who? Except people who benefit from it. At the expense of their own population, number one. So he's had enough of him, and the fact that he went out and declared and outlined these guidelines for a proposal was in itself a blow to Netanyahu. Now, the problem is we still don't have an official draw with full details, right? And Netanyahu is already not agreeing to anything. He's just trying to push his way around everything. Although clearly something has been provided to him. Why? Because he admitted to Ben Gvir that he has a draft. And Ben Gvir, when he called him, he said, I want to have a look at the draft. And then Netanyahu said, yeah, sure, we'll come to my office. That was last week. And then Ben Gvir had another statement afterwards, said, I went to the office. I didn't see Netanyahu. I was met with several of his advisors. And they told me, what draft? We don't have a draft. So either Benjamin Netanyahu is lying about the draft, or he does have a draft and he doesn't want to show it to him because he knows he will leave the government if he sees it, because it includes terms that are red lines for Ben Gvir, such as the ending of the war. Ben Gvir does not want to end the war. As Benjamin Netanyahu declares as well, by the way. Eileen Strange, what is going on with people trying to get the ultra-Orthodox to the IDF? It's because they're struggling. There's been a trend that's just over 2 decades old in Israel of more and more people refusing to serve in the army and asking for exemption from conscription. Many of them will do it in a manner that does not get them into trouble. Asking for an exemption. For example, I have a health problem, I have a mental health problem, I'm a pacifist, I'm a this, I'm a that. Or if they are deployed, they will ask to be in certain positions that are not related to combat. So to do with the logistics or administrative stuff and what have you. Intelligence, stuff like that, just so that they don't fight. Then, obviously, you're stuck with less people. Less people are coming to Israel. More people are leaving Israel. What are you going to do? This is a military state. What are we going to do? We're going to have to try and force the Orthodox community. It failed before. Why? Because they believe that they can't serve in the army. We need to practice the Torah and learn and this and that. Some of them might believe in the concept of Israel and some of them not, by the way. And some of them are blatant anti-Zionists. And Israel will try and cover up that fact to a large extent. Now it's because they're desperate. They can't bring the normal, the average Israeli person to come and fight. They had so many attempts to attract people from other countries who were abroad to come. But Benjamin Netanyahu's son didn't go and fight. Yair sitting in Miami with security. So the Israelis and obviously the Israelis, from their perspective, look, I don't have faith in this war, and I think it's killing our own people. Why should I go and serve? So it's the hate for Netanyahu, the lack of faith in the campaign itself, the distrust in the military and their decisions, the lack of faith in the country itself. Tough luck. What do you think the Orthodox community is going to come? No. And now they declared through their chief rabbis. Well, it was the chief rabbi of the Sfaradim, not the Ashkenazi, who said if we are forced to serve in the army, we will immigrate in masses. And they can do that, by the way. They will for like their religion and stuff. Because you're talking about communities that are like very, very strict. So nothing's working. And if someone comes and tries to act like a macho with them, by the way, and tries and force them to join the army, they will be met with similar fierce resistance. And by the way, some of the brigades that are now primarily involving radical settlers from the West Bank, the religious Zionists, who call themselves the religious Zionists, the West Bank squatters, basically, the Ben Gvirist type. They were initially established as orthodox brigades, like Netzach Yehuda, for example. Clearly did not attract the Orthodox community, the Haredi community, but the religious Zionists found, we can go there. A bit of religious radicalism, a bit of national twists suits them. So they started to have, that's the same brigade that Joe Biden declared sanctions on. The U.S. administration, it alongside a couple of other brigades, they announced that they want to have sanctions on them. Ironically, because they commit crimes. Like the whole army commits crimes. What are you talking about? Stop fooling people around. So that's why, and I don't think it will work, even if they are met with someone who is much more fierce than Netanyahu. Although Netanyahu already promised them he won't, by the way, but that's why he has them in his coalition. He has the Orthodox. Listen, Netanyahu has, you just need to understand this. Netanyahu has Orthodox Jews in his government that do not like Zionism. In many cases in Israeli media, if they talk with them and they speak to them about politics and solution, the journalists will tell them, it's like, I feel like I'm speaking with a far left movement in Israel. It was like, no, you're not speaking with the far left in Israel. You're speaking with the Yahudut HaTorah, the Torah Judaism, one of the groups that's in the government. Why are they in the government? For their own benefit. They get money, they get funding for the yeshivas, they look out for their communities, they don't care who leads the country. So long as we don't have to go and join the army and we get the money, the funding, we're fine. You want approval for this, we'll approve. You don't want approval, fine. We don't really care that much. We care about our community. Deals. He strikes deals. And in many cases, he gives some of them positions of ministers without a file. So a minister of what? Just a minister. Why? So he can have the salary of a minister and not of an MK. This is how Benjamin Netanyahu works, by the way, and always has. Ruby K. Bibi running out of cannon fodder. Exactly. And that's a phrase, a term used very much in Israel, by the way. Cannon fodder. I call it basar totachim in Hebrew. They use their own people. Who do they use? The youngest people. the youngest people, just over the following years of indoctrination and brainwashing by Zionism with this pseudo history, and then they send them to die. Why? Because to them, I was born here and I have to join the army, and we're defending our country. Ill-informed. That's why many of them, after serving, like in other countries as well, by the way, like in the US or the UK or other countries as well, they will see what they've done. Lots of them are in the US, but some in Israel as well. Like there's an organization breaking the silence about many troops who served in the West Bank, for example, and what have you. And I spoke to many of them, by the way. They get used in this system. They chew them in and spit them out. That's what they do. Shikoma, do you think the US is using the sanctions on the resistance group in the West Bank as a means to force Hamas to take the deal along with the massacre in Nusayrat? Look, I said it before, I'll say it again. There is nothing you can do to put pressure on Hamas. If a complete destruction of Gaza, if a total genocide with over 100,000 casualties, hell, over 150,000, if not 200,000 casualties, 50,000 of which including the missing, slaughtered, chopped children, women, innocent men. If that wasn't enough pressure to put on Hamas, what else can you put as pressure? Hamas declared it a long time ago. They said, we're willing to be eliminated in the process of liberating Palestine and our nation and Al-Aqsa. The people of faith, they'll sacrifice. And the Palestinian people will sacrifice too. So they can't put pressure on them. All of what Israel's done and is trying to accomplish in Gaza, the undeclared objective, the ethnic cleansing, it's doing it on itself. They're ethnically cleansing Israel from Israeli Jews primarily, by the millions of Israeli Jews who fled Israel and who will never return, by the way. Those who are internally displaced, over 40-50% of them will never return to the north or the south, by the way. Many of them already had other houses in the country. But what are we talking about? Almost half the population out. It's not going to work. Because the Palestinian people, they're the owners of the land. And the Israelis are the squatters. They're the ones who stole the land. That's why many of them have dual citizenship. Why? To have a back door to get out when we need to. And now many of them feel like that's it. The need has come, so let's get out of here. Kate will Milikovsky continue bombing Lebanon, Syria, Iraq even after the Gazan ceasefire. I'm skeptical about the USA ceasefire, lying Biden doing it for votes. Yes, Joe Biden obviously is concerned about votes. You're talking about a shift. Many of them did a 180 from the beginning. Listen to their statements from the beginning. Yeah, even if we have a ceasefire, that won't stop them from attacking other countries. It's a reckless state. It's a threat to regional and global security. They constantly target neighboring countries. They target multinationals. Anyone, any multinational, I'm telling you, Americans, European, they'll kill them. Deliberately, by the way, knowingly. So he will probably continue. So long as that country exists with this type of enablement, they will continue. 2 tacos. Did you serve that to me? Of course not. The conscription in Israel is on Jewish Israelis, and not the religious communities. Hell no. You have the Druze community who are forced to serve, apart from their religious people who study religion. And that was after a deal was struck between Israel and leaders of the Druze community after the establishment of Israel. In return for like protection and what have you, they also try and divide between people. They tried to learn some of the communities like the Bedouin Christians or some of the Muslims to serve and whatever. That failed miserably. I mean, over 99% talk about Israeli Jews who serve in the Israeli army. Obviously with the Druze community, for 1, 2, 3%. And again, you're talking about the same people who are now refusing to serve and are just simply losing complete faith in the country as a whole. So that was from 2 tacos. Okay, I'm glad you were kidding. 2 tacos. I'm glad you were not serious. Okay, that seems to be the last one. Okay, cool. Let's wrap it up there, guys. All right. Thank you so much for joining me again. Lovely spending time with you as usual. Like I said, if you haven't watched my previous videos, go ahead and watch them. Quite short. Thanks again to all of our regular viewers, members, subscribers. Thank you so much for everyone who sent super thanks. Bob, Manuel R, and Matlas X. Apart from that, enjoy the rest of your evening and week ahead. And I will hopefully be with you in another live stream tomorrow. Take care, everyone, and peace.